A warm welcome to Vipul Mudgal. He was supposed to join us in March, but that was we had to kind of sorry, not in March, in the spring quarter, but we had to. Ayan is here. Hi, Ayan. You would. Uh, I was just going to start introducing Vipul. You want to? Jan, I was going to start introducing Vipul. You want to say a few words before that? You're muted. You're muted.
Welcome, everybody. Vipul, thanks so much for joining us. Satyajit, thanks for hosting this and introducing Vipul. Brett, welcome back and thanks for helping us. Welcome, everybody. Thanks. Please, Satyajit.
So I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Vipul Mudgal to you. Vipul is a public intellectual. He started his life as a journalist, and what a place to start in. He started in terrorist-infested Punjab, as it was called at that point of time. He was in the barracks, so to say, getting reports from all kinds of interesting quarters. And from there, he moved on to write about it. He did a PhD in journalism and media studies from University of Leicester. Following which, he worked in the BBC. He was a resident editor in Hindustan Times. He set up a group which worked a lot in rural reporting, where he was a fellow at CSDS, did some wonderful projects, came up with a couple of interesting books. But these days, Common Cause is a lot in the news because it has taken up stands which is against the government. It has been petitioning with the Supreme Court on a number of public interest litigations. And this is a group which is also supported by people like Prashant Bhushan and others. Vipul is the director of this group. They came up with a very damning report on the state of the police in India. That report is available in soft copy. Those who want a copy of this report can get in touch with me or Brett, and we will be happy to circulate that to you. Today, he's going to speak on policing. He's going to speak on the pandemic and basically the story of the reverse migration which takes place from urban centers after COVID lockdown. So I leave it to Vipul to introduce his subject and take it from here. He'll speak for about 40 minutes, and after that, we'll have a Q&A session. Thank you so much, Vipul.
Many thanks, Satyajit, for a very generous introduction. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Brett. And thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for having me. I would be talking about policing. We are neck deep into two studies on policing right now. One is policing in conflict areas. Now, there are all kinds of conflicts going on in India. There is insurgency, there is militancy, there is also terrorism, there is Maoism. There are all kinds of other conflicts which are going on in the country. So policing in the middle of the conflict. So we are doing it in central India, in about 7 or 8 states of central India and western India. We are doing it in parts of Jammu and Kashmir and Manipur and Nagaland and other states of northeast of India. So this is one huge report in which we are still conducting face-to-face interviews, believe it or not, with masks on. We waited for about 6 months to get permissions. Finally, we have the permission. The second report we are working on is called The Police and the Pandemic. I was hoping when I gave this topic by this time, this report will be over, but we are still working on it because once again, I mean, some places where we were going to hold our interviews did not give us the permission, etc. So it's still going on. I have a truncated report and some findings which I'll be discussing today, but I'll be talking generally about policing. And as I was saying when we were talking informally, that people who know about India and some of the goings on there know so well that in fact I would probably learn from you guys. But at the same time, these are kind of field notes of things. Probably, I'll show you some pictures and I'll probably do some scene setting about certain things. But we are taking a slice of life from the pandemic, and this is the reverse migration of people. Easily, I think the biggest migration of its type anywhere in the world. I don't think this level of 30 million or more people moved in a matter of about a month, covering 1,000 kilometers or more, sometimes on foot, sometimes on bicycles, on whatever mode of transport they could get. So while this was going on, and there was an unprecedented situation all over the world, India was no exception. So that was also going on. So we thought that let us look at the policing in the middle of this. Now, a caveat is that you look at policing in extraordinary situations is just an extrapolation of what goes on normally. you know it's not that the police become completely transformed or humanized or whatever. They do what they do best. Sometimes you also see the human side of them, and most of the time you see the use of brute force, which is common, which everybody likes. In fact, even people sometimes like their police to be tough. So that is a conundrum we'll discuss at a later stage. But let me say in the beginning that the police is and will always be the most visible face of the state. Even in a democracy, police is actually quite essential. Nobody can do without police, and we know that in a large number in large number of geographies all over the world, particularly where the some kind of populism is in rule. The pandemic is being used to get more and more powers, and to use the police in a variety of inventive ways, very often to suppress people. So I would say that if you say you don't do that, or you don't use the police, or if a state is unable to uphold the rule of law, so to say, you would call the state a failed state. If your writ is not running, then what is the state doing? So obviously it becomes a failed state. But if the state's writ runs only through the police, only through force, then you call it a police state. So the dividing line is actually quite thin, and you always need a balance. Even in democracy, you need the police to protect the minorities, to protect the vulnerable sections of people, to protect even the gender protection, children, everything. So you need police in every which way. But at the same time, you also need to save democracy from police, because it undermines democracy by violating constitutional norms or human rights. So what we will see in this is that how during the pandemic, when this unprecedented situation was unfolding in India, how the police was behaving and how the citizens were expecting them to work. So I have a presentation. I'll do a share screen and I hope it works. And surprise, it does. So now, the reverse migration, as I mentioned to you in the beginning, is something which was unprecedented even for us. Even in India, people did not know that so many people migrate, and there is no registry of migration. So a very large number of people move. They trickle mostly from the states which are less developed, less industrially developed, or more manpower, in eastern states of West Bengal, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, northern states, and they mostly come to Delhi, to Gujarat, which is in Western India, to Maharashtra, which is in Western India, and to parts of South India, which are more industrially developed. So people go in a variety of ways. They take all kinds of transportation, and they go into shanty towns, and they go, the slums of Mumbai and everything is actually a small piece of Bihar and Uttar Pradesh and West Bengal. So I will show you what happened during the lockdown in India. There's some pictures here, and we'll discuss. This was the strictest lockdown when this happened anywhere, arguably anywhere in the world. People, when the lockdown in India was announced, there was only 4 hour notice given, and it was so strict that everything virtually came to a standstill, to a grinding halt. All factories closed, all banks closed, all railway stations, buses, everything that moves, everything closed in a matter of about 4 to 5 hours. And I mean, uh, people suddenly realized that their jobs were gone. There was no cash with them. There was no clarity what was going on. There was fear. There was complete kind of state of uncertainty. So this was the last week of the month. It so happened that the announcement came on 24th of March. And a large number of people who work in the construction sector and in the unorganized sector, and by the way, more than 90% of India works in the unorganized sector. So people who are working for many years don't even know who they are working for. They get their wages from the labor contractor, and labor contractor is the person they know. Even if there's a big board saying that this construction site belongs to Larsen and Toubro or some of India's absolute top engineering companies, the workers are not employed by those companies. They don't have any contract from those companies. This is the way the work takes place. So when the lockdown happened, everybody wanted to contact their labor contractor, and the labor contractor was also running for life. They are also not very rich people, so they also come from same places where the migrant workers come from. Many of them are, I mean, obviously they're very clever, and sometimes they just make themselves unavailable. They don't take calls. So there was general panic, and people realize that if they do not move in the next 4, 5, 6, 7 days, then the rent for the next month will be due, and there was no money. So people started coming to. Now you see in this picture, this is a bus stand in Delhi, where there was some rumor that some buses are going to start going from somewhere to somewhere. So people thought that, okay, if I'm going in a particular direction, if I get even 100 kilometers, I can cover some distance, and then I'll see, maybe I'll go somewhere else. So it worked like that. And people are I mean, millions of people actually were using bicycles, and those who were slightly better off, they had motorcycles, or some people were able to hire some form of private transport. Many people together hired private transport. Then there were some trucks of essential services which were allowed to run, because there were some projects which were going on, as you see in this truck. So this is allowed to move. So those who were going on bicycles, they put their bicycles on the truck and negotiated some kind of a payment with them, and went for 100, 200 kilometers. Normally the distance to be covered by people was in the range of anything between 200 to about 1500 or 1600 kilometers. Now you see in this, there is this truck, this huge truck on which people are sleeping, and there are men, women, children, older people. And there was also the fear of the pandemic, and there were different estimates being given, but nobody knew how many people were there. First there were estimates of about 10 million people. Then there was the estimates of more, and I think in the end it was said, and these are only numbers up to about April, May, and after that
a lot more people moved and many people moved back. So the total number of reverse migration and back migration, once the reverse migration was over, the migration again would be probably, I will not be surprised if it is in the range of 50 million or even more. So, and in 3, 4 waves, and it is still going on. But at that time, when some people contacted with the public interest litigation, the Supreme Court of India, the Solicitor General of India said to the Supreme Court, "Sir, no one is on the road." Now, the television was showing it 24 hours, newspapers were reporting it all over the social media. There was there were pictures, there were graphics, there were videos, there were horror stories, there were human stories, there were all kinds of things happening. And the Supreme Court of India actually believed the Solicitor General, and that no one is on the road, sir. So this was the state of affairs. We also did some media analysis and we saw that what was going on at that time. So most of the reports which were coming out about the lockdown were about the violation of lockdowns and arrests. Now, this was quite unusual because it was a health emergency after all. So the report should have been about more like about the pandemic, about the hospitals, about the doctors, about. So the government also did some very interesting obfuscation tactics on the days when the migration was at its peak. you know the government suddenly announced that there would be uh, flower petals will be showered on the frontline health workers from the Indian Air Force helicopters. Now, this happened in a large number of cities. The doctors and the nurses and the paramedics came out of the hospitals. And then there was, like, when a helicopter comes, there's a lot of racket. And then there is flowers being showered on them. And the pictures, the television, like, went mad with that. And suddenly, for many hours, for at least a couple of days, they showed nothing but just this: how good, how nice, how the COVID warriors of India. So then there were the naval ships were firing flares in the sky in the honor of the frontline health workers and things like that. I mean, on the face of it, there was nothing wrong. I think you could do that. Why not? I mean, countries should show their solidarity. The prime minister also announced that people will come out on their terraces and they'll clap and they'll bang their utensils and things like that. That also happened. One day he said that people will come out and they will light lamps. So all that was going on. So this was basically headline management, because there was too much footage going, you know, about the workers going back home. There were stories which were completely unputdownable. A 14-year-old girl was taking her father, who was a patient who had, I think, some kind of trouble in walking, on a bicycle to a village 1,200 kilometers away, and she managed. And now a Bollywood movie is being made on her life. So all this was, and what was, how was the police being reported in the newspapers at that time? Most of the time it was about collecting fines for violating the lockdown or handing out punishment. And the punishment was not always from the statutes. You would, Satyajit and Professor Malhotra would know, that morga bana do. I mean, now what is, how to translate that into English? You put them into, please help me if so you kind of hand out a punishment on the spot, and you say that you raise your hands and you stand up, or you sit in a uncomfortable position, or give two tight slaps to somebody if you could, or take some money or whatever. So basically, the thing is that this is the human side of the police, also, I would say. That sometimes they say that rather than arresting people, if you hand out some punishment on the spot, and a large number of people also said, yeah, this is perfectly all right. If they don't, I mean, they are not killing us, but they were also killing in some places. And the most egregious were cases in which some people were killed in the police custody. I mean, the most widely reported case was from Tamil Nadu, a city called Tuticorin, where a father and son were arrested by the police for keeping their shop open beyond the hours which were allowed. There was a window of 1 or 2 hours, and they were taken to the police station, and father was taken first, and he was beaten up, and he was in critical condition. The son came, he was also badly beaten up, and both of them died in police custody. For what? I mean, if the charges were proved that they had actually violated the curfew, then they would have been given a punishment of 3 months in jail. For that you get killed, beaten to death. you know so there were many stories like that. At the same time, there were also stories of policemen helping people, but those stories were fewer and far between. Now, one more thing I would say before coming to the police about the media, because we were also looking at the media, that the media were framing the stories in a certain way. In India, that there is a Hindu nationalist government ruling. You have They take great pride in polarizing, and they do it all the time. So an opportunity came when, in the beginning of the pandemic, just about the first few days of the lockdown, there was a Muslim congregation, an international congregation of Muslims, organized by an organization called Tablighi Jamaat, which is mostly, it's not, I mean, a fundamentalist, you can say, if you want to stretch the word, but they are a proselytizing organization, you know. So they have a large number of people from, uh, what should one say, hardliner Muslims who were gathering. But there was permission was taken for this. And by the way, around the same time when the permission was taken for this, because there was no lockdown, there were many other religious congregations going on in various parts of the country. So a lot of people had come from Southeast Asia, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Myanmar, from many other places. So those people were holed up in one mosque, and it was said that they were, many of them were actually victims of coronavirus themselves. So the stories which came out in the news were that the Muslims are spreading coronavirus in India. So it was like the television in India was reporting absolutely nothing but Tablighi Jamaat, Tablighi Jamaat, Tablighi Jamaat. And there was so much of social media blitzkrieg at that time. You had, in fact, there are some people who are monitoring the websites, and one such organization, I think, is called, I think, Equality. It's a digital human rights group called the Equality Lab. And they said that there was one particular hashtag, Corona Jihad, which appeared 300,000 times, and 165 million people saw it on Twitter. you know so there were many more stories like that. In fact, many social scientists in this country have also commented, and one good comment came from Arjun Appadurai, who said that the Muslims themselves are like seen as an infection in the body politic of India. And so there were stories of absolutely fake stories of how these Tablighi Jamaat people, when they were arrested, they were spitting on the policemen. They were misbehaving with the nurses when they were taken to the hospital. And many of those visuals which were going viral were actually visuals from other countries, from Myanmar and Thailand and from God knows where. So there were stories of bioterrorism, and there were all kinds of stories. So the in fact, the policemen in many states were also, I mean, they come from the same stock. They were also affected by these stories. And in fact, in many places in Rajasthan where there is a Congress government, not a BJP government, there also the policemen were actually telling the Muslim vendors, do not come out. So there was certain number of hours when the essential supplies were allowed. So if you are a vegetable vendor, or you are a fruit vendor, or one of those services, you were allowed to go out. So in fact, the police, in one case, when somebody also recorded a video, one policeman got so angry. He said, didn't we tell you not to come out? So this guy said that, look, I also have to feed my children, and these are the daily wage people. So he just upturned his entire cart. So that was going on, and it was like not out of the ordinary. This was going on all over the country, because on one side the government was giving daily figures of coronavirus infection. And in the same briefing, they were also telling how many Tablighi Jamaat people have been caught, because many people had gone to different places in India. How many people have they infected? So all those stories were also going on. In the middle of that, the police were also using, there was no standard operating procedure of how to manage a health emergency. So they were doing this. And I'll show you these two pictures, which yeah, I hope you're able to see. There is this man on the left side. He's paralyzed waist down, and he's a beggar in Delhi. And he was going from Delhi to Agra on a handmade cart made of scrap. And Agra is about 200 plus kilometers. His village is more than 200 kilometers from Delhi. And this picture has been taken midway around Mathura, which is about 100, 120 kilometers from Delhi. And he traveled by this cart. Now, this story, now this I must say that there is a PhD student in the US who has collected these two pictures and many more, and he wrote an article in the Wire from where I've taken this. His name is Aman Abhishek. I must say this, and his piece in the Wire is worth reading. If you do a search, you'll find it. So, and it says how the Modi government manufactured public opinion during the migrant crisis. So, this story was framed as a story of great bravery. That look at this man, he's so brave. You know, he's covered so much distance. He's also going to cover more distance. What a brave man. You know, nowhere, there's no irony in this, that a disabled person should be given, he has some rights. He should be given some good treatment. He should be given shelter somewhere. He should be taken to some hospital. He probably should be given some food. But no, there is the story is not about all this. The story is about extraordinary bravery. Another story, this is story about, you know, the fate, how fate comes, you know, the overloaded truck. And there was a road accident in which I think 26 people died on the spot, and many more died later. And this is just one example. There were many, many incidents like this. So this is again framed as a story of what fate can do to you, you know, not about the fact that these people, men, women, and children, old people who are going long distance, there could have been special trains running for them. There could have been special buses for them. There could have been some arrangement for them, or probably shelter where they were living. So, you know, this is how the the entire pandemic and the works, it was being framed and it was being presented. So this was just a slice of life from you know, the first phase of the lockdown. And there were three phases of the 3 or 4 phases of the lockdown, starting from March going up to end of May. So we did interviews. The problem with interviewing people was that there were not many people who were doing face to face work outside in the field. So we collected a number of organizations. We got in touch with a number of organizations, collected names and phone numbers of people who were frontline workers who were distributing aid, food, and ration and medicines, etc. In the field. So we contacted these people, and each one of them was serving something like 100 to 350 people every day. And if they work for about a month or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, they came in contact with thousands of people. So we thought that if we are looking at policing, let us interview these people, and find out what was their experiences and what were the stories they heard or they came across while interacting with those people. So we did interviews with 114 aid workers who were working at the grassroots level, and we talked to about 100 migrant workers who covered long distances. Some of them were also those people who tried to go but were not able to go and came back. And there were some people who did not go, who were not able to go at all. So this was in the states of Delhi, Delhi NCR, which is the National Capital Region, parts of Haryana and parts of Uttar Pradesh, and come into that, and then Rajasthan and Gujarat. So this was a survey in which we found that most of the people were young males between the age group of 21 and 40 years. Both the aid workers came across this profile of people, and those we interviewed, they also said that they were this particular group, or these people we were able to track in these three states were from Bihar and Uttar Pradesh. But in many other areas, there are people who are from Odisha and West Bengal. Most of these people worked in construction, in factories, and they were daily wagers, and some of them were professionals like tailors and barbers, etc. We, we also realized that those who were slightly better off, they had some form of transport available. If nothing, they had a motorbike. They were able to go on a motorbike, and many others were able to actually do long distance bicycles and also hitchhike on trucks as and when they managed. And large number of them, about 64% of them, were from vulnerable caste groups. They were either SC, the scheduled castes in India, who were the erstwhile untouchable communities, or the tribals, who are forest dwellers, or among the poorest of poor and most backward tribals in India, or people of minorities, mostly Muslims, who come from these states. Most of these people were, uh, you know, I think getting about 15,000 rupees a month as a salary, uh, which is absolutely the lowest uh, category. And 52% of them were able to reach their villages, and some people came back. And the cost of travel was, for a family, was around 18,000 rupees, which is much more than a monthly salary per person. It was coming to about 2,500 rupees. Most of the people, when we asked them the question, why did you leave? After all, if you had tried, you could have taken shelter at some place, at some school. There were many organizations which were distributing food. What was the scare? So the scare was not the health emergency. The scare was not the coronavirus. Of course, it was also there. But the biggest problem was that they had lost their job. So if there had been any job security, there were some announcements made later that some 50% of their wages will have to be paid by the employers. But those applied to people who had an employer-employee relationship, you know, But if you worked in an informal sector as an unorganized worker, the chances were that there was no contract and there was no employer-employee relationship. So there was no question of getting the money. So, and the food was being distributed mostly by the volunteers and NGOs. And in fact, NGOs also means in India, a large number of temples, gurdwaras, mosques, they were also distributing food. Some places the government, whenever there was government authorities giving food, it was being given through the police, because the police became not just the, as I said in the beginning, most recognizable face of the state, but the only face of the state. You wanted to see any modicum of authority, you would see the police. You wanted a curfew pass, you go to the police. You wanted to go out for some reason, you you need to go to the police. You want you want to report somebody, or if there is a contamination zone, in if you happen to be in a contamination zone which were declared as red zones, you needed the police permission. So police was everywhere, and there were, unfortunately, there were no control rooms made in which there were other officials or revenue officials, other departments, branches of the government. So it was just police everywhere. Now, the experiences with the police, how frequently did the police use force against the general public during the lockdown? And we asked them the question that, in your experience, how frequently did the police use force against the common people? And we had asked, we have collapsed many questions into one. And there were things about, were they beaten up with a cane, or were they kind of arrested, or were they physically assaulted, or were they taken to the police station, or were they arrested for the day, or were given some punishment like standing in the sun for 2 hours or 3 hours or something like that. So all that was treated as use of force, and arrest was separate. So they said mostly that very frequently, about 50% people, particularly the aid workers, they said, because they came across a large number of people, they said that the use of force was very frequent or somewhat frequent, which means you also do these gradations in the surveys, because you want to give them, there were different categories of treatment given, how frequently. So there were about almost 80%, uh, you know, said that more frequently, the use of force was done, or rarely or never. It was also there. I mean, a lot of people said that, which is about 20% or 30%. So then arrest or use of violence by the police. So again, it was mostly because of violation of lockdown rules. And you know many times, sometimes, again, when you know join the two, you actually find that the use of force and the arrests were also very common. But the police, actually, there is an attitudinal thing, and that is why the reports that we prepare, the status of policing in India report, they tell you that it is in the attitude of both the police and the public, that it is a done thing, that when you see that a small crime or a small violation takes place, then you hand out a small punishment and let people go, rather than arresting them. But at many places, the arrests had to be done because the state governments were very, very adamant. Like in Gujarat, a large number of people who were coming from Maharashtra and going towards Bihar had to pass through Gujarat. And a large number of them were from Gujarat itself. So when they were crossing the border of Gujarat into Rajasthan, so the Gujarat was very, very strict, and a large number of people were arrested, and they were just pushed into jails. Jails were overcrowded, you know and we actually in the interactions with these two sets of people, we realized that the largest number of formal arrests took place at the borders, you know, at the state borders, because there were instructions like that. And most other places, the small punishment, or beating up or things like that, were handed out to them. How helpful was the police in the in so they said, I mean, a good number of people said that no, they also said, they also said that they were very helpful and somewhat helpful, but there were more people who were saying that they were unhelpful. So what was going on was that, wherever you had uh, the, a good set of kind of police officers who were dealing with people who were their own stock, you know. So if you are dealing with people who you are familiar with, who you meet quite often, then you are actually more, you don't suspect them so much. You are more normal with them. But if you see outsiders, say the migrant workers who are coming long distance, they are bringing trouble. They are bringing corona. They are, they are violating the lockdown. So the only option in the state, the police works in India for the states. So the only thing was that you go back. How can I go back? I've covered 500 kilometers. How can I now go back? The only way for me to march ahead, but you will not allow me to march ahead. you know so now the last part, I think, perhaps, is that did they discriminate against the different sections of people? So excuse me, one of the things that came out, and which is consistent in all other reports that we have done, is that the police are particularly discriminatory against the poor. Now, you would say that, they have an anti-minority mindset. Yes, particularly against the poor Muslims. They are against SC, ST, against the tribals and the erstwhile untouchable communities. Yes, but among the poorest of them, they are particularly discriminatory. Now, uh, migrants, they were very, very discriminate. They discriminate. 65% respondents said that they discriminated against the migrants. 50% said that they, the Muslims were victims of discrimination. So now the satisfaction with the police. Now this may actually, break the heart of some people who study, that actually more people are satisfied, largely, broadly satisfied with the police than dissatisfied. The reason, and this is like globally, most people who do not come in touch with the police, they are broadly, they say, yeah, it's okay. For them to be tough with these people is very important. And I have seen people who are very highly educated, who are doctors, very senior people, who are saying that these people should be shot, you know, because they are violating the curfew. You don't realize that they don't have anything to eat. They don't have a place to live. Can we do something about them? Can we give them water? Can we give them shelter? But no. So actually, more people were kind of mildly or slightly satisfied or fully satisfied with the police. But there is a story in this which I will probably answer if there are more questions. But one of the things in this is that people who trust the police are always more, and that is why the system functions. People who are dissatisfied the police are less. But the story is within this frame, that people who are distrustful of the police, Now, when you see within that group, say about 34% or 35% people, then you realize that these are the poorest, these are the most vulnerable, these are the people who are working in the unorganized sector, these are the people who come from the shunned kind of classes and caste groups. So that there is the story is that the police can be good, or sometimes when people say that the best police that money can buy. So if you can actually get the police to do your bidding through influence or pressure or money or whatever, then your work is done, you're okay, you're satisfied with the police, you're not particularly dissatisfied. So this is the story of the police in the pandemic, and I finish here. I hope it made
Yeah.
sense.
Thank you so much, Vipul. This was wonderful, especially for the students of my class, because this is telling you what social movement organizations do, come up with research, come up with facts, which can then be put into action. So at some point of time during the Q&A, if you could address this issue in terms of what happens to this report and how do you think you will be able to bring in, make sure that something like this does not repeat itself. What are the ways in which a group like yours would take this forward? Let me, however, open this to wider questioning. So if anybody wants to ask a question, please unmute yourself and please come in and ask your question.
Vipul, please, can you stop the share screen? Then we
Yeah.
can see you still better. Thanks. Thanks very much.
Maybe you can take my question then, Vipul.
Yeah. So how to improve things and how to stop this from recurring is a I think it's a policy question. The thing is that if the when the level of water goes up, everything which is floating in the water goes up with it. You know, so it's like that. You have to improve policing in the normal times. You have to. You don't need just an efficient police, but you also need an accountable police. You also need police, which in its normal functioning, which is people centric, which is which is responsive to the needs of the community. So if we don't do that in normal times, then in extraordinary situations, I mean, this is the only thing they know, like the use of force. Now, one of the reports that which I have shared with you, it has a section on attitudes of police. Now, they have a particular attitude towards the lower caste people, towards women, and towards minorities. Now, some of these things can be helped by just proper training, you know, just to tell them that, look, how to behave, how to work with different sections of people, to increase diversity within the police force, to have more women in every thana. So it's the route is actually much longer than bringing out a standard operating procedure during health emergencies. And I'm sure that some police organizations within the police force would be working on an SOP, but that SOP would be of no use, you know unless you actually improve the level of the water. So I mean, that's the general kind of understanding that we have. And how to take this forward, I mean, we do advocacy. We are doing a broader, bigger study also. We share it with all police organizations. We also share it with many other organizations which are doing advocacy around rule of law, to use this in whatever way they can.
I have a question.
Yeah, Jennifer, come
Um,
in.
could you maybe explain the relationship between police and the military in India, if there is any, and who currently holds the police accountable?
It is actually the military is different. I mean, we have the military is not into policing role except in areas which are conflict areas like Jammu and Kashmir, where police is deployed in civilian areas, where the military is deployed in civilian areas. Otherwise, the police, we have something in between, and we call them paramilitary forces. These are armed police, you know, and this actually brings me to something very interesting, which I'll tell you later. Let me first answer your question. Uh, the accountability has to be to the people. Accountability also has to be to the law. So what tends to happen in many democracies like India is that the police tend to work for the rulers of the day rather than as the arm of the law. So those who come after elections and who become chief ministers and who come into authority, they think that the police, they can use the police as their private armies. They can be their kind of huge security forces going with them wherever they go, doing their bidding all the time. So the accountability has to be to the people. And the instrument of that accountability is the entire criminal justice system, in which you have the judiciary, you have the system of legal aid, you have the system of prisons, in which, once again, uh, 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 you know prisons should be friendly, prisons should be made for the citizens, for reforms, for reforming a criminal rather than for punishing a criminal. So the accountability is a matrix which goes into just about every area. And it goes without saying that if the institutions within democracy are strong, then I think the mechanism of accountability will also be strong. See, and these institutions can be anti-corruption institution, Central Vigilance Commission, or the or the institutions like Police Complaints Authority, where the citizens can file complaints of misuse of authority by the police, etc. So when the institutions work, the accountability tends to be better.
Thank you.
So Anshu, Sikwa, and Jan in that order.
Thank you, Vipul, for that really, very, very interesting sort of telling us how the police behaved during the lockdown, and but also the general impression people have of policing in the country. So that was really very interesting. What I actually found, you've been reading about it, all those things that happened during the lockdown when we saw the reverse migration, but when you actually put it all together and say, oh, this also happened, this also happened, it's just flabbergasting, how horrible the things were during that time. So I have, just two or three, comments, questions, and so one is, of course, that in this kind of scenario, power of the police seems to increase, right? Because there's so much in demand. How does that play out, or are they only sort of instruments of the state, as you just said, right? So, or is there a way in which they enhance their power, and does that have sort of long-lasting effect if it does? That's one. The other, I just thought I would bring it up because we all know about it, is as you pointed out in the beginning of your talk about the Supreme Court being a kind of a willful, ignorant party to what was happening, and this kind of pro-government partisanship of the Supreme Court and the judiciary generally is something that we have been seeing now for a while, and not just in the case of the lockdown, but in multiple other ways. The CAA protests and what happened to those who were protesting, many of them arrested under UAPA, and the Supreme Court not really picking up on that. So I just thought that this is a good opportunity for you to actually say something about what is happening to the judiciary generally in India. And finally, a question on the Bihar elections, because you did point out that how many of the migrant workers were actually from Bihar. 2 in 4 is the figure I think that you quoted.
Yeah.
So we do know that the BJP did really, really well in the Bihar elections at this time, much better than their allies over there, Nitish Kumar. But we also do know that the RJD, which was the party in opposition, did quite well as well. But the sort of their campaign of the RJD was more in terms of looking for employment for the youth, and that they have been, that we need to create employment and so on and so forth. But I don't know, you're the media person. Was the question of the way in which the migrant workers were treated during the lockdown, or the way they were just not, the government did not do anything virtually for them, and you had these, so many, 30 million is what you're quoting, walking hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. So the critique of the government during the lockdown, did it feature at all in the Bihar elections? And if it had, if people actually feel a sense of resentment, a grievance vis-a-vis, the government that continues to simmer, though it did not show up in the elections to that great an extent, that would be interesting for us to know. So thanks.
Thank you, Anshu. There are many questions in that, and in fact, I think maybe you can answer some of them better than me. The horrible they were, but there were also stories of police doing good things. When police does something which they are not expected of doing, then suddenly it gives you, there's a wave of pleasure around, and people, there are stories and there are videos and there are memes and things which are shared. One of my friends was at a traffic light, and he saw one policeman actually on a two-wheeler, and he stopped his bike and went to the side. There was a destitute family sitting there, and he took out his tiffin box. I think he was going from home to the police station, and he gave his food to those people and came back on his bike while the red light was on. And this guy was like completely shocked out of his wits. He said, am I seeing something wrong? Is he a policeman or not? Or can he do that? So that was also happening. The actually they are, I mean, everybody is a human being, and there are human feelings among the police. They were horrible because they were taught to be horrible. And there is a I mean, to say things simply, there is a Ernest Hemingway quote, I think, most probably. It's about somebody who went, a tycoon who became bankrupt. And somebody asked him, sir, how did you go bankrupt? So he said, first, it happened in two ways. First, for a long time, and then abruptly. So what has happened in India with the police, there's something which was going on for a long time, and we were not registering it. And now abruptly, when there is a populist, authoritarian, Hindu majoritarian government, in whatever way the liberals can describe it, it's, you can actually see, because it's abruptly coming into your face. But actually, the story was going on for a long time. The police, how can they be so gender blind? How can there be so,
there's no diversity in the police. It should reflect the diversity of a multicultural society. It was nobody ever tried that. We have signed international protocols against torture, but we are not serious about it. Torture is a way of life, to extract. And in fact, one of our reports has a whole section on police investigation. And you would see that 65% police officers have said that during investigation, they get either departmental pressure or political pressure. So they don't let you complete the investigation. Now, this is something which is going on for a very long time. Now we are seeing it because suddenly this Shinebag goes on, and then you see a lot of innocent people are being framed for rioting and things like that. Yes, of course it is happening, but it is not something which has started yesterday. So, the human side of the police is not to be overlooked. It has to be, they have to be told, and we constantly say this, that look, and in many places where people expect them to hand out a small punishment and leave people, they are very thankful that they just gave you a slap and left you. If you had gone to the police station, you would have lost 2 days wages or 3 days wages, or maybe would have ended up in a jail. The second question about the state and the police, I think there is a way in which, if policy wise, if we decentralize. And one good thing about this country, as Brett said in the beginning when we were talking informally, that the police is with the municipality actually looks after the police. So the police is so decentralized that the community can actually defund it. But in India, the police is either the central or the state, and it stops there. So if the and we have local self government, village panchayats, etc. So if there can be a tie-up there, it'll be, more oversight of police by the community, by the people, you know, rather than by the state or the ruling party alone. The third thing about the Supreme Court is that the courts very often don't want to get into the administrative domain. They want to see the spirit, and they want to see that that things are going in the right direction. There is chaos, there is nothing new in India. The courts know that if there is chaos, there is chaos. But at this time, if they undermine the authority of the government, they would probably be doing a disservice. I mean, I'm thinking charitably from the side of the Supreme Court. So what they were thinking at that time, they thought that, let us give the government a free hand for the time being. They are giving an assurance that they will take step. Let us see if they take step or not. Where the courts have gone horribly wrong is that the courts could have said that, okay, let us form a committee right now. You also be in that committee, Mr. Solicitor General, and let 4 people, one of them a judicial magistrate, go out to the street and see whether anybody is on the road or not. Or ask all state governments of India, 29 state governments of India, to give a status report within 24 hours. Court is well within its capacity to do that, and they could have very easily got a good response and could have instructed the government while being mindful of the fact that you don't want to undermine the authority. So the courts actually failed in their duty in that sense. So I think, and the last thing about the elections, etc., I would say that it did not become the issue for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons was that there's large scale obfuscation going on, and I think it makes the media management so fascinating a subject. I think the sociologists have been dealing with only caste and community and caste class power and interplays and things like that. Look at the media, look at the way things are done. For about 2 months, the entire media in India building up towards Bihar elections was talking about a drug case and an actor's suicide in Hollywood. And the government was like, helping them in every which way to make sure that the real issues do not come out. And the media actually played a great role in obfuscation and in removing the real issues from public domain and doing kind of mock fights, or shall we say cockfights on the television screens rather than talking about the real issues. So I think it was mentioned in Bihar elections in a big way, the treatment given to the migrant workers, but it was more about not making trains available, not giving them the transport, not giving, making sure that they get some kind of wages and things like that, and not so much on the police. Because once again, the mindset of those political parties, including RJD or the SP or the BSP, is that when they come to power, they keep the police like everybody else keeps the police, as if they are meant to be the private armies of the politicians.
Sikwa?
Yeah, thank you. I actually had a question kind of related to the tail end of your comments. So I noticed that you were sort of saying that the media has this role of exacerbating tensions and of like scapegoating migrant workers and Muslims in India during lockdown. And I was wondering what mechanism would be implemented to get a more accountable media coverage of these issues, and if it was dependent on the sort of Hindu nationalist government that we're seeing right now, and if the two are sort of mutually reinforcing each other, or what the solution would look like.
Am I allowed to say I don't know?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think broadly that. I mean, I'm skirting around, and I would say that, how does it's a fascinating subject in political science, and you ask your professors who are smiling that, how does majoritarian state come into existence? What happens in, what is populism? What is how is populism and authoritarianism going together? What is othering? you know how do in India it is Muslims. I was talking to one of my friends in your university in another campus, Professor Larry Diamond, and every time I mention majoritarianism in India, he says, "Oh, forget India, it's doing quite all right. Look at Erdogan in Turkey. Look at Venezuela. Look at Orban in Hungary. Look, so, and they say it's much more egregious than you see in India." The fact is that there's the same playbook. You know, there is majoritarianism, there is misuse of elections, there is, uh, the state uses the brute force and makes sure that the institutions are not allowed to function or they are undermined, particularly the courts, because that is the only check which can actually topple the government, which can rock the boat. So you actually you rein in everything which can rock the boat, you know undermine the power of parliament. So I think there is, I mean, what you asked is a very, and that's why I say that I'm probably, there are more qualified people to answer that question here. That the somehow the entire world is moving towards a more populist, more authoritarian, more majoritarian kind of way of governance and running the state. I hope it does not continue, and the antidote is actually institutions allowed to work. Antidote is when elections are not allowed to be hijacked. The antidote is that this media needs to be busted, and a new media needs to be resurrected from the ashes.
Jan? You're muted. You're muted. Jan, you.
Vipul, thank you so much for such an tremendously moving and also insightful account. I'm by listening to you, I have in mind a comparative approach. Would like to compare with Brazil, with the United States, with South Africa, and I'm thinking of institutional analysis mentioned several times. I'm also thinking of social cohesion, heterogeneity, inequality, and then, as you say, the police are the face of the state. If it is so, it will also be the ethos of the state. But is what we are talking about the state or the government? And are we talking about the federal government or the actual state governments? As in the state in terms of Gujarat, etc. So is it a BJP police or is it a Gujarati police, etc., etc.? And then next, what I'm thinking of is in relation to institutions is police training. Is policing viewed as is it service policing or is it domination policing? There where social cohesion is low, I'm thinking of the United States, for instance, training is minimal and is geared to how do you use equipment and not geared to how do you provide service. And the ethos is an ethos of control, going back for a very long period. So police are given more and more tasks, but they are not trained to de-escalate and provide service. And this also relates to questions of budgets. What are the police budgets? Um, and that also relates to the role of media. Are media supposed to provide accountability for police performance in terms of service or in terms of control and domination? And then comes in the question of accountability, but I think that has come up already several times. So these are just things on my mind. Vipul, thanks so much.
Jan, that's a lot.
Oh, sorry.
Let me start with training, equipment, and ethos. Equipment can be so misleading and can take us in kind of completely different direction. We in India, for a long time, we thought that our problem is that we are a poor country. We can't afford good equipment for our police. But I mean, looking at the United States police, I think we are much better off with less equipment. I mean, they shoot very often because they have the bloody gun. you know I mean, I did my PhD in England and I worked for BBC. I lived in London, and I mean, the standard bobby in England is not given even a baton, you know and you make your armed police so efficient that should there be a need, if a policeman on the beat duty realizes that there is a terrorist situation or something, then you call for the armed police and it should be able to come faster than a fire brigade or an ambulance. So, you cover the emergency and still you do not give the gun to the standard policeman, because if you have the gun, the chances are that you'll use it. you know so I think the equipment, and I happened to be in the US when this was going on, when the George Floyd thing had just broken out. And I couldn't believe my eyes, actually. I mean, I have been working on police and I'm so blind, I didn't know that.
the armored vehicles, the taser guns, the automatic rifles, and my God, the kind of equipment they have all around them. I think 90%, probably 100% of that equipment is not required. So I don't want the police in India or any other country to follow the United States example. We don't want to militarize the police. We want to demilitarize the police. I think the word should be not defunding, but demilitarizing. But you have an extra problem in your country that you have the citizens are also armed. So the police have to be one better. So, I mean, you sort this out. This mess is very, very US. So the equipment, I think we are doing all right without equipment. Where the equipment is required is in forensics, better investigation, better vehicles to be able to reach the spot, faster. So the equipment is required in those areas, and again, training, as you said, is, I mean, one can never say enough in favor of training. You are absolutely right that in United States, I mean, you still have good training in many ways. In
12 to
India,
16 weeks, Vipul. 2 years in Germany, 4 years in Japan. Sorry.
yeah. So I mean, I'm corrected on that. So I would say, I mean, let me put it this way: we are worse. Only 6% of police officers in India have received any training in their entire career. Now, there should be gender sensitivity training every 6 months, I would say, in a feudal country like India. If not 6 months, at least do it once in 5 years, you know, of junior level, mid level, every level. Again, we have a caste-ridden society where there are prejudices against certain communities. So we need to constantly train the police, in that. So the ethos will actually emerge out of that, you know and what you said very rightly about the federal issue, it is and it will remain a federal issue. And where I think the Americans have done much better than most others is that their police is not centralized. And I feel very good when I see the governors saying that this is our domain and president has absolutely no business doing anything there. And then suddenly the councils say that it is not even governor's business, the police is our business. I think that's decentralization at its best. So I think that's the good part. But what the societies have been doing recently, that they've been actually giving up the good part and taking the bad thing. So I think the issue is very, very real, and for all societies, and it becomes lethal when the combination of autocracy and a majoritarian kind of state gets the power of the police with it. So I think again, at the level of federalism, a lot of issues of authority need to be sorted out. That it's a real, I think it's one of the most important federal issues, as you say. And you're absolutely right about there's a lot of mess there, whether it is Gujarat or it's central or what. So when the CBI, the Central Investigating Agency, is required, the state has to make a request. Sometimes the states don't, and then they are still thrust upon the state in certain matters. So all that mess is still going on. There's some clarity which needs to emerge from the political system.
Thanks.
Ashish.
Yeah, thanks, Vipul. This is super important, super interesting. I actually have a range of questions. It's sort of all center around how do you change, how do you see the possibilities for this dynamic of state government or central government control of the police and press indifference to it changing, right? And so, one of the things, so Amit and I have been doing some work comparing across other public services, ones that the poor use, ones that the middle classes use, etc., and trying to understand which ones get cleaned up, etc. Big story, big part of this is that the press simply doesn't cover the services that the poor rely on. And the kinds of, abuses or shortfalls in services that particularly afflict the poor never get covered. So is it the case that there's sort of two ways to think about this. One is to say, okay, you have state governments, regardless of party, that are going to get the press to muzzle itself and not cover these issues. The other approach to it is, look, the press simply has no commercial interest in covering these things because, who are the ones buying the fast-moving consumer goods that advertise? So I'm wondering what you think about that. So that's one issue, and then the second one is thinking about sort of what are the institutional shifts that could actually support a more responsive press here, right? So one difference between the US and India has been the role of citizen journalism. Seems to have played a much more serious role here. The fact that people can film the police has been instrumental in a number of cases. I think in India, the dangers to somebody of doing that are greater, but be curious to know what you think about that. Also thinking about the incentives facing police officers within the service in terms of, how are your promotions determined? Are there ceilings in terms of the way the hierarchies are structured that make police particularly pliant in the hands of government officials? Or is it just the usual sort of threat of transfer, etc., that does it? And finally, is there a constituency for decentralization? Are there local governments that, other than Delhi, that actually are saying, look, please give us control of the police force? So sorry, a lot of questions.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, the media ones, I would love to kind of discuss some other day. I mean, I love to do that. That's what I do most of the time. And police is a distraction. My main work is actually on media. But I'd love to kind of talk more about it. But I mean, it takes us into deep waters. So as they say, this is a straight translation of Urdu sher, which says, "ये राह गुजरती है गहरे पानी में." तो अब हम गहरे पानी में पहुंच जाएंगे, if you can follow. So, the thing about let me start with the last thing that you said about the incentives and what kind of promotions and transfers and those things. There was a famous case in India. It is called Prakash Singh versus Union of India case. And my organization, Common Cause, was a co-petitioner in that. So if you do a search on India, Prakash Singh versus UOI, probably you'll get 1 million responses on Google. So it was a famous case. Common Cause was a co-petitioner in that. In that, there was a landmark judgment which came up with 7 guidelines issued by the Supreme Court of India. And Anshu, the Supreme Court here played a heroic role, very good role. They said that there should be state security commissions. The State Security Commission, once again, it answers part of that earlier question that Jan was asking about the federal, structure and division of authority and unity of command of the police, whether the state takes care of it or the center does. So if there is a State Security Commission which has, say, a slightly broad-based constitution, which means that you have the chief minister as a member of it, the leader of the opposition is a member of it, the speaker of the assembly, or the equivalent is a member of that, the chief justice is a member of that, and that security commission decides the transfers and promotions of at least the senior officers or the operational positions.
So, and also independent members like from NGOs, professors and experts, etc. So the State Security Commission was was a guideline issued by the Supreme Court of India, which the states are not following in letter and spirit. They are doing it, but so if they do it properly, I think, a good number, I think 50% of the problems of Indian police will be solved if the transfers and promotions, and as you described, this incentive system, you know, is done in a citizen-centric way. And we know that chief minister, it'll be wrong to keep the chief minister out. Say it centrally, keep the prime minister in the body, but keep the leader of opposition also, keep the chief justice also, so that there is a little bit of checks and balance, like balancing each other. The second one, there were 7 guidelines. I mean, they were all very important guidelines. The other one, that the 2 more that I'll mention, one was about the police complaints authority, that every district should have a police complaints authority in which there should be a judge in charge, so that it is not dominated by administrative officials. And the general public should be able to go there and file a complaint against a serving police officer, and some kind of action will be taken. And there was one recommendation about separate wings for prosecution and investigation. And there were a few others, like 2 years fixed tenure for Director General of Police. So those things were good, but the 2 more things that you said are extremely important. I think they are intertwined with it, but I don't know. I mean, it is like taking a very big picture, like not covering the poor, is a problem all over the world. We think that the media is presenting a slice of life, but media is presenting a slice of life which is very, very skewed. We did a study which came out in EPW some time back, which was about the rural coverage by 3 top Hindi and 3 top English newspapers of India. Rural India is 70% of India, and the coverage in top 6 newspapers of India was 2%, less than 2%. And if you looked at that 2%, you will find that the real issues of India were not even 15%. The 85% of that 2% was dedicated to issues of rural business, like procurement, like transportation, like fertilizer, like anything to do with rural business was rural news. Issues of malnutrition, issues of farmer suicides, issues of mother's malnutrition, those issues which really, really matter. The lack of investment in agriculture, agrarian crisis, debt, all those issues put together are not even 15% of that 2%. So you actually realize that it's 0.04%. Why does the media do it? Because media is customer focused, and customer wants to know more about what is the drug scene in Bollywood. So or they think so. So they are second guessing the customer all the time, and they are giving the customer what the customer wants. And they say that my newspaper should give me a little bit about music. It should also give me about culture and this and that. And the rural news is depressing. They say that if you have too much of suicide and hunger, then a Samsung ad or a Bose speaker ad doesn't go well with it. The reader is like depressed. Give him something cheerful, nice to talk about, and then there is a advertisement of Bose. It'll go very well with it. So it's like that. So it is basically the entire political economy and the kind of, I mean, we go into the cultural studies part of it, that why media does not cover the poor is a huge issue. I mean, I think I'll stop there. And one more thing that you said, yeah, I mean so I think more or less the citizen journalism, etc., is I mean, we are getting there probably. Media is quite vibrant in India, at least used to be about 5 years back. But I mean, we are going, we are getting polarized, very badly polarized, and I think that the polarization of the society is also reflected in the media and the police, and I think it can't go on. If it goes on like this, then I think there will be no democracy. Perhaps not just in India, in rest of the world. So I think, I mean, that's what I feel today.
Thank you, Vipul. There are a few questions of the chat which have been put up. So what I'll do is we'll just take up the questions because we've run out of time, because these might be questions which will trigger some thoughts in terms of future work for you. But I think one of the interesting things which is coming out is how do different states, what is the different types of policing which is there in different types of states. Just like we've had a lot of studies which have been done on education and health services, the comparative studies which has given us a different comparative assessments, and that has led to kinds of changes. You know, the Kerala model, the Himachal model, and as a result, then the pressure in terms of reforms. I mean, that is something which perhaps needs to be done rather than you know, some, and you may come up with weird answers there, because the higher the state capacity, you may find the more policing is happening, and the lower the state capacity, you might find different kinds of atrocities being taken up by the police, which are kind of not reported. Anyway, those are wider questions. Jan, Brian, we are just collecting questions. There will be no responses. Jan, you have a question to give Mo?
Or you can take 3 or 4 questions. I'll answer them together, and
Okay.
I'll try to be brief.
All right, Jan.
Well, Vipul, a general question: the status of the pandemic, how is it spread in relation to institutional capacity to manage it, and how does the picture look at the moment?
Brian,
I think,
you want to, Brian, we're collecting questions. Brian, you want to come
Yeah.
up with your question? Yeah.
I was hoping if you could highlight the differences between the equipment between the United States and the Indian forces. Previous in the Q&A, you mentioned how just having the gun itself was pretty, vital just to the violence that occurred as a result. So I was hoping if you could highlight, what do the Indian forces have that might solicit that same response?
yeah. So any other questions?
No, that's all that there is. Yeah.
Okay, so I think these two I can, the pandemic thing is, I think it's ultimately the public health system. You know, how robust is your public investment in health, and we are moving in completely different direction. You know, even even in small towns, the private nursing homes, we call them, they are small private hospitals, boutique hospitals. So we are moving in that direction. So I think the state capacity is going down, and I think we are mostly, I think many parts of the world, they are trying to follow the American system, or the American prescription, shall we say, where you give insurance to people and let the private sector take care of healthcare. Now the problem with that model is that in America, they don't tell you when they prescribe this system for countries like India, that America built itself by huge public investment in health at one point of time. At least your best hospitals are still public hospitals. you know. So but that is not the prescription for other countries. So I think the pandemic has exposed the underbelly of all societies. We are seeing in the United States, for instance, the vulnerable communities, particularly the blacks, are more victims. In the same way, in India, the poorest are more the victims of the pandemic. So I think in that sense, there is, I mean, there is a kind of parity. So the left out and people who are excluded in some way, or people who are vulnerable or who are poor, are victims, more than anybody else. The differences in
People,
US and India. Sorry.
people, but a quick note. My sense is if you compare United States with a country like South Korea or Germany, care is concentrated on private care. It's profitable, not on public health. And it is a dramatic weakness that is exposed now. Sorry, please.
Yeah. No, I think I actually I'm not so qualified to comment much on this. I mean, these are things that I catch from the air, in my journalistic absorption. That I still believe that someday, because you also mentioned something in the beginning in your first question, the issue of inequalities. I think the inequalities is not just in your wallet. I mean, inequality is access to healthcare, proper education, and all this. So I think the societies which are able to take care of those inequalities early on in some way, by perhaps investing more in public health and public education, are able to do new things today to make it profitable and work, because people have come to a certain level. But where you become, one pregnancy went wrong in a rural household in India, can push a well-to-do family, so-called well-to-do family, into complete abyss in a matter of days. One accident, one amputation, and you are from AP, what we call the above poverty line, APL, to BPL in about 6 hours. One flood, one earthquake, so when people are so much on the brink, then I think you can't actually prescribe just things which work in other places. I mean, United States is actually way ahead of India and everything. I mean, we can make fun of Trump or we can make fun of anybody. The fact is that, I mean, the way the institutions work, the way, even today, if a destitute or a homeless person is taken to a private hospital, the private hospital cannot throw that person out. You know, it has to find ways of, whether it's going to charge the municipality or council or whoever. But the thing is that I mean, this is what I'm told by the doctors, that look, if it's a emergency case, you can't throw them out. You have to treat them. So there are a lot of things in these countries which are going right. About the police in the United States, I would say, in spite of the fact that they are, I mean, the police is bad to certain sections of people, but at the same time, the police still works as an arm of the law, rule of law. The police will not change its colors just because of one councillor or one governor or whatever. I have seen cases in UK, in London, once, when a very lowly constable policeman on the road actually booked a Supreme Court judge, you know, and he kept on pleading that, look, I didn't mean to do, whatever. But he said, no question. So all that can be done, but not in India. I mean, if you touch the wrong, right person or wrong person, you probably lose your job, you know. So it's like that. So the society is very feudal, systems are quite bad, I mean, I'm forgetting the name, the person who asked the question about US India thing. We are actually a much more feudal society. We are getting there. you know we are learning that diversity is important. Nowhere close to diversity. Giving like there should be 33% women in the police. We don't even have 11%, 10% in most states, but we at least have 10% today. Earlier they were not even that much. Today it's compulsory in India. If you're going to arrest a woman, you have to have a woman constable there. you know so all those things are happening agonizingly slow, but they are happening. So I think in many ways there is no comparison between the two. I mean, because the criminal justice system itself has not collapsed in the United States. The legal aid works. The prisons, I mean, you can criticize it, but I think in spite of that, you compare it with the prison in a developing country, and you would see that they are bursting at the seams. You are for a capacity of 800, you have 8,000 people, 6,000 people living there. In complete squalor and that kind of situations. So I think at one level the comparison is okay, but another level, I think the biggest thing which works for United States, and I hope it continues to work, is that its institutions are very strong. you know the uh, the institutions are being undermined. I think some people, I think there's a tug of war going on. There's some people who are trying to weaken it, are trying very hard to weaken it, but there are other forces which work. So I think the judiciary works, the other systems work. In India is also much better than many other countries. I mean, you mentioned South Africa, and in many things South Africa is good, but India is also an example in many areas, like the right to information. You call it Freedom of Information Act. The right to information is 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 exemplary. It's very good in India. It's working well. you know uh, the governments are also in India, in spite of the fact that we have not had a dictatorship in India, in spite of poverty and everything. We've had democratic governance. Even the Bharatiya Janata Party, whatever criticism we can uh, you know uh, we can voice against them, the fact is when they lose election in a state, they just peacefully go and sit in the opposition. It's not that the transition is violent or anything. So democracy actually works in some way. But the question for us is, and we are looking at the police, we see that the institutions of policing are intrinsically connected to one entire criminal justice system, and the other, the way democracy conducts itself. And with all the other institutions, including parliament and the anti-corruption architecture, from CVC to, I mean, we call it Central Vigilance Commission, to Enforcement Directorate, to whole lot of other agencies which are there, which are supposed to work independently.
So we're over time, but if I may, one point, namely this hypothesis: there where social cohesion is substantial, the institutions will tend to be towards public service. Where social cohesion is low, and pardon, Vipul, I'm a European, so I respond to about your American points in that context also. Institutions will be geared towards domination rather than service. And in this country, we see that in relation to policing and Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and I can't breathe is part of that. So social cohesion, ethos, institutions, um, uh, pardon.
Absolutely.
You're muted, sir.
So that is a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Vipul, for being awake. What, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the night in India?
Yeah,
at this
it's
point
quarter
in
to
time?
4 a.m. and I think I deserve a coffee from each one of you when I visit there.
You deserve a stronger drink than coffee when you
Exactly.
Yeah. We hope that you will be able to be in Santa Barbara soon. You were planning to be here in spring, but hopefully we'll be able to host you soon and give you that strong drink. Thank you so much for coming in and
Thank you for.
sharing with us your report. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
But
so
please
much.
see
Vipul.
the report. We'll share both the reports with you.
Yeah.
And please see the reports. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
you.
It's a
All
pleasure.
right.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.